Mariette. How are you?
Fine. How much is from the south of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? He's from the Najran. They've got a very special way of dancing.
Oh, good. Did we get to see it?
With thought.
Oh, well, did you bring
They
this here?
couldn't bring the props today. And then we have Naif, who's from Riyadh. No. You're Najran too?
Yeah, next to Najran.
Okay.
What the small city.
And then we have Hamid, who is from the east. So these guys are from the southwestish, and Hamid is from the east.
And this is the lovely Debi Sheridan,
Who's also an international student.
who's going to talk to us today about international students in the classroom. And we are so excited for you to be here and for your students to be here. That's great. Thank you. So I'm just going to let you do your thing.
Okay. So who have we got here? Kathy and Tim. We saw on the way, and Maria said, "Get him to come with us."
Just got through playing basketball.
And Debbie Hansen, who's one of our teachers as well. And your face is really familiar.
I'm Heather Hunter. I teach healthy lifestyles and sexuality. And 20% of my class with healthy lifestyles is from Saudi Arabia.
Really?
This semester, which has been interesting.
Okay. So I'm probably speaking to the converted. So I don't know how many of you know that there is a move from the administration that we try to internationalize the campus. And so, Kathy, do you have a lot of international students?
We don't have any in the MPC program. In fact, because I'm not quite sure how to handle a current applicant, that's why I'm here.
Oh,
To
right.
get some ideas about
Okay.
spots.
Okay.
What is MPC?
A Masters of Professional Communication.
So we have, in the LEAP department, is everybody familiar with what the LEAP department is?
Learning English for academic purposes.
Okay, so the old ESL, okay, this just makes it sound more academic and gives us justification for being a department and not a program. And I'm not at all cynical about anything. I'm old enough to be cynical. So in the LEAP department, we have students who come from all over the world, including Canada, to learn to speak English. French Canadians often have very little English. So we have just a small smattering here today. So because we want to internationalize the campus, we have to provide ESL. And ESL students who come on an I-20 have to be accommodated if they are second language speakers, or if their TOEFL or TOEFL scores are low enough that their test of English as a foreign language is low enough that they need accommodation, then we have to provide that for them. That is part of the INS, the US. I don't know if you know that the INS no longer exists, which is really good for us immigrants. Now it's the USCIS. Apparently it's new and improved because it's got a longer acronym. So because of that I-20 that's issued, students have to have accommodations so that they can get their language up to a level where they can come into your classes and cope. But I don't know if you have ever tried to function in a second language yourself. We get 18 months to get students from 0, sometimes they don't have the alphabet, to working in your classrooms. And so that is a hell of a short time. It takes 5 to 7 years to develop proficiency in academic language, and about the same time to become proficient in a social language. And they're very different things. So academic language can take a lot longer because it tends to be the Greco-Latin part of English. The Anglo-Saxon is much easier to understand and to gain. So we have students who will struggle as they come into your classes. By the time they graduate, they should be proficient, because that's the length of time it takes anybody to learn that proficiency in a second language. And English is a very hard language to learn because we have so many rules, and I'm sure that our teachers here can tell you, you teach the rules and then you have to teach the exceptions. which takes a long time, but there are exceptions for every rule that we have in English. Spanish is the easiest language to learn because it's much more organised than English. German, had my children learn German because that's all very organised. So I want you to think about our students as a resource for yourself. So when you think about why do we have, or no, how, great. How? Why won't it rub out? Why won't it erase? How do international students, this is going to rub off, isn't it?
Is that a Sharpie or is that a dry erase?
I think the dry erase is okay.
We'll get it, no worries.
Okay, I just killed it. How do, nobody will know that, that's my writing. It's not easily recognisable. International students enrich an American, I'm going to abbreviate that, classroom. Okay, so I want to ask my students what they feel they do to enrich your classrooms. So what do you guys bring to American classrooms?
We bring our culture.
Okay.
We bring our language, our customs, our beliefs.
Oh,
Our traditions, knowledge.
and how is your knowledge different from the knowledge that students in the classrooms already have?
It's different in the sense that we're from different place, and we learn what we learn in our country is different from what we learn here. So the knowledge we have in our country is different from the knowledge you have here.
Okay, so you have a different point of view to share.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other things that you bring to us, to them, those Americans? The ones with the new empire, because we lost them.
Traditions.
Traditions.
Our traditions.
Our foods.
And you guys, other teachers should come to some of our end of semester celebrations. Get some good food. Okay, anything else? Okay, so why is it important for Americans to have these experiences? Sorry, I'm anxious, so I misspell. I go into British spelling. People correct me.
You know, I think as a teacher, you know, we have such a diverse population that we need to know who our students are. We need to know about them, about their culture, their language.
How does learning about somebody else's language help you as a teacher? Debbie?
Gives you a better understanding of where they're coming from. It gives you an opportunity to be sensitive to the diversity.
Okay. Have you found that learning about one of your students' language has changed your appreciation for your own language?
Definitely.
Can you think of any instance where that's happened?
Before you asked me that question, I was thinking just of an experience I had the other day with my students. I have a person from Saudi Arabia, one from Mexico, and one from China. And sometimes I like to learn some of their words. I know a little bit of Spanish, but sometimes just to build the rapport and to help them feel a little more comfortable, sometimes I'll ask them, how do you say this in, or como se dice in, and the
In
other day.
Arabic.
No, it is, I know, yeah. No, I just asked them, how do you say this? And we all learned each other's language, the word crazy, which is kind of crazy, but it gave us a chance to just bond a little bit, feel a little more comfortable, kind of the informal time that we need. So that was enriching to me. I can't remember how to say crazy in Chinese,
Right,
but
I don't know that one either.
yeah.
Okay, is there a reason for having students translate? Because it's a very difficult, learning the language is very difficult, and if you can constantly revert to your own language, it actually stops you. It is not helpful to have somebody say, so crazy in Spanish is loco. And so the student who speaks Spanish hears loco, and that provides some comfort. It doesn't mean that they're going to access the word crazy. But when they do learn all those, because we have to teach in English, obviously we can't address all the languages there are on the campus. And so we teach English through English. So when we get to words like centrifugal, though, which isn't a common word, but is obviously an academic word, is there a point to saying to Hamad, can you look up the word centrifugal, please? And then all the arrows, you understand this word. Is there a reason for doing that? Because it's probably a word that hasn't been prominent in their high school English, their high school classes. I know I didn't learn that in high school. Is there can you think of a reason to do that?
Well, it engages so many senses. You know, you're using touch to maybe look up your dictionary, or and the verbal and the oral. There's just, I think it connects with a bunch of senses that allows students to make a connection.
Okay, and it is important theoretically because you don't want their native language to stop. So if your English outstrips your native language can fossilize. And so when these students go home understanding centrifugal and all the other words that are really important academically, if they can't translate those, they can't connect with their native society. Does that make sense? And so it's really important that they learn those words in their own language too. Almost all of our international students are here for 5 years. That's the length of their visa, and then they go home. And so they are here for a short time, and then they're going to take that knowledge home with them. They're not here to stay for the rest of their lives, so they will go back to their own culture. And they need to be able to continue that knowledge that they've learned in English in their own language. So there is some reason for having them learn that language, and to have them have students look up this in your own language and make sure you write that down. We're developing a department vocab book where a new word is written down, translated, contextualized, and then they have to practice spelling it as well, so that there's real learning of that word. Okay, so how about anybody else? Is there any reason that you can think of for having diversity in your classroom?
It gets us out of kind of our tunnel vision that Americans sometimes get, where we look at things only one particular way that we look at things, and we're not forced to look at other perspectives. And so I find that is something that's valuable.
Okay. I know that quite often people say to me, "You're an American citizen, aren't you?" And I think, "No, why not?" Because I'm a British citizen and I'm an Irish citizen, and I've already got 2 passports, and it gets confusing if you get 3. Which one do you use? Which way you're going? There's obviously benefits coming in and out of the country, but there's just this assumption, well, if you live here, why aren't you a citizen? And not all of us want to be citizens. I have 2 daughters, one is a citizen and one isn't, and they're kind of like fighting with that. But that's okay. The one who is has got reason for it. Her husband wants to leave the country and work somewhere else. So there's a lot of reasons that you might welcome diversity in your classroom, but I think that that point of view is one of the most important. In my research for my dissertation, I came across a lot of statistics that indicated that most American students learn what they learn about the world from the television. And so if you think about how America is represented on the television, I was thinking, at the time that I was reading that, I was thinking about how one of the most popular movies at the time was, it's gone out of my head, it's got Brad Pitt and a little Chinese guy who constantly gets into a suitcase. and
Ocean's 11.
that's it. Ocean's 11.
That's amazing.
Good job.
Wow.
Ocean's 11, 12 and 13. Who are the heroes? A bunch of criminals. So what does that say about America? America values criminals. If that's the only access that somebody has to American cinema, then they're going to think, well, we should just send all, which is cool, of course, what the British did, send all their criminals here because that's where they're going to fit in. If it's not a bunch of criminals, then it's people blowing things up and killing anybody who doesn't look like them. Well, what does that say to people outside of the country? You better not go there if you look any different to the people that you're going to be living around, because you might be the next one that gets shot. And so one of the good reasons for having diversity is that people will go home and say, you know what, Americans are okay. They're not all crazy, they're not all criminals, and they're not all shooting the place up. There was one or two in this room in Lampress Hall that were quite friendly. So just focus on that, that's our diplomacy. That's it. I'm not going to go on talking for too long, but was there anything else that my guys, they were so full of ideas in the classroom as well. Now you're intimidating. Good job you're not looking up. Why do Americans need to know about you?
To improve the economy.
All right, there is an international global economy, so we can improve the economy if we understand more about other countries, and we can understand that best from these students. We recently had a student from Ethiopia who was very difficult to communicate with, and he constantly would come up with these stories that were kind of scary examples. And so I was trying to explain to him that he had to hand this homework in, and if he did, the teacher would change the grade, because he said he'd handed them in, and she said he hadn't. And I said, if you can show me them with the signature on them, you get the grade for them. And then it came, but if I kill you, and I thought, okay, this isn't going very well. And I said, probably not a good idea to talk about killing me. The last student who did that ended up getting deported because he had his arm around my neck when he said it. So he said, no, if I kill you, and I said, no, we have to stop. Let's go out of the office. He said, all right, if I kill her, he pointed at the student aide who wrote, and everybody's getting a little irritated and agitated and a little fearful because all he's doing is talking about killing. When I did some research on the way that Ethiopians negotiate, they tell stories. It's a very feminine way of communicating. So if you kill me, you kill my opportunity, and that's what he was trying to tell me. If you kill my opportunity, if you make me do this way, I'm not going to get the opportunity that I want. And so when I did some research on how British businessmen are finding negotiations going with Ethiopians, they have to completely change their approach so that they can understand what the Ethiopian is trying to communicate with them. It was just a bit of an off-the-wall experience and example, but this kid has been raised in civil war, and he's the tail end of one of the terrible famines that happened in Ethiopia. So his life experience is very different from the average American experience, where you're not faced with those kind of terrible experiences every day. So, but we in Britain, we definitely need to be able to understand how that student is going to communicate, because it's an economic advantage for us, and it's an opportunity that otherwise we would lose, because we just say, okay, he's talking about killing lots of people, so let's put him in the lunatic asylum or in jail. Is there any other reason that we need to know about you?
Unity.
Unity, global unity. Is that important, Harriet?
Yeah, it is.
Because
It's important because you'll be able to unite one another, you'll be able to communicate with one another. It brings this kind of cool vibe with one another.
And Harriet is one of our star students, so obviously Nigeria is going to benefit immensely from Harriet and her cousin being here, if her cousin comes to class. He's lost in action somewhere on campus. Matt, you told me about an experience that you had recently.
Yeah. I forgot the word, touristy or something.
tolerance?
Yeah,
Tolerance. Okay, so if we can increase tolerance for each other. Knife is from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and I don't know how many of you know that the king died last month. And this is a very emotional experience for many of our students. I actually had one student come in my office. We were talking about his wife coming into the program, and I said, "I'm sorry to hear about the king." And he almost started crying. It was a very deeply emotional experience for him that this had happened. And that it was a lot of, we weren't really sure whether the new king will give the same scholarship. If he doesn't give the same sort of scholarship, he's going to lose half of the class because they're on scholarship. And so there was somebody who went into the writing centre, which is right next door to our office, and this young man said to the writing centre coordinator, who he knows very well, "I can't believe there's a picture of a dictator outside." And she said, "Oh, okay, let's talk about this. Do you want to show me what that is?" And so he took her outside and he said, "Here," and it's a picture of King Abdullah. And underneath it we had just written, King of Saudi Arabia, Abdullah dies at 90 years old, rest in peace. And so he was deeply offended by the fact that we had put that up there, but we've got a large population who need people to know that. And so he was starting to give her this long list of why that shouldn't be there. And then one of my students came along and he said, "That's my king." And he was really proud of it. And this young man just went, "Okay." And that changed his entire paradigm, that there was somebody who was saying, "That's my king and I respect him and I love him." And so that gave this student pause for thought, and the writing centre coordinator said she was so grateful that this kid came along and said, "That's my king," and was respectful of him, because that changed that other student's point of view, or changed what he was prepared to say, at least in front of somebody else. And so I think that that's invaluable in the classroom, and you have somebody who can give you the other side of the story. Anything else that you guys can remember from our discussion?
I think accepting, as a teacher, if we teach our students to accept one another, working together and accepting the person for who he is or who she is, I think that makes a big difference. As students, I think they can tell if a teacher, is very accepting of them, and just like a student, student with another student. So I think that is a big thing also.
Thank you, Maria. I know that there has been at least one student on this campus who is a Muslimah, and because she has made the choice to continue to wear her headscarf here, is easily identifiable. You see her with her, she doesn't wear an abaya, she just wears long coats. So this method, standard of dress is called hijab. It means dressing modestly, and covering your head in some way is part of that. In the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, it's a cultural manifestation of a commandment to cover. And she was told by her professor that that was inappropriate in his classroom, and that she shouldn't come to class dressed like that. And this is something that is deeply personal. And this woman has chosen to maintain the headscarf, not wear a hat and a neck scarf, which we see some of our Muslims do. But that is an unacceptable comment from that professor, and to intimidate this student that way. Some students have told me that when they're in the ESL LEAP program, they feel like they become part of a family. And they will recycle through teachers. So if they come in at level 1, they have seven levels to finish, and they will recycle through different teachers. Some of them, they will get same teachers time and again. And so they feel like they're in a family. And one student told me recently, "You know what, I wasn't prepared for university when I left the program, because I really felt like part of a family. And the first day I went to the classroom and there was nobody there from the LEAP program, I wanted to cry. It was full of Americans, and they all looked at me, and I didn't have a friend in the room." And so she really felt intimidated by that. And she is one of our much, much better accomplished students socially, but she still felt overwhelmed and ostracized by walking into this classroom where she didn't know anybody. And you know, there's always a couple of students who know each other, even if they didn't know they were going to be in the same classroom. I don't know how many of you have had the experience where somebody says, "Hi, how you doing?" You know, and it's always very loud, and that made her feel intimidated too. So this isn't an easy experience for any of our students, especially as they're so far away from their own culture. And I know that I have 5 children, but 2 of them live here in the US, and I know how it can be very difficult when we go through festivals if it's not my turn to see my children. So the one who's married has a mother-in-law who's very determined that they spend every holiday with her. And so it's very difficult sometimes to spend Christmas on your own. When you've raised 5 children and had a very busy home, and then you come here with only 2 of them, and then you find that somebody else's need is greater than yours is. So our students are going through that kind of experience as well. And another Saudi student said to me recently, "I want to spend Christmas with you before I go home, just so I can see what it's like." I thought, it's very lonely sometimes. But you're more than welcome. At least you'll change the face of the day. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Yeah, Kathy.
Actually, I have several questions that have to do with graduate students, and I don't want to dominate the discussion, but like, I'm assuming that if a student comes here, an international student comes here for a graduate program, they would not go into your program, is that correct?
No,
Okay.
no, it's not.
It's not
Many
correct.
of them
Oh,
come.
okay.
Many of them come into us because they can have done a bachelor's at home, and it has translated, so it has been evaluated as something that would prepare them for a master's degree here.
Okay.
So many students actually come to us having finished a degree, and maybe haven't been working in the field, in some field. We have somebody in that program at the moment who's in level 5 or 6, Shamsa. She's a qualified teacher. She taught for a couple of years before she came here. And I've had other women from Saudi Arabia who have been qualified teachers, but they've taught in Arabic, and all their bachelor's work has been in Arabic. So before they go into a master's program, and Shamsa's hoping to go into the Master of Education, she needs to learn English before she goes there. And so we have people come from all over the world who already have a bachelor's degree, and then we try to get them ready for. You can imagine how much more difficult that is, that they're going to go into master's classes where the academic language is very different from going into history 1010, history 1700, 1500. Gene Sessions used to have me teach American history because he thought it was funny. They do raise a few questions. I remember Debbie's daughter was in my first class, and she was like, "So what do you know?" "I know one page more than you do." "I just know it's very short. Could you get this finished in an afternoon?" "If you want to take all the tests this evening." So it's the academic language that's going to be their biggest problem now. Because if they come here with no English at all, we need to try and help them get ready for master's academic language rather than just bachelor's academic language. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I guess that if the students who do that have not yet been admitted to it. Like I have situations where students are applying to the master's program for admission. And it sounds like what you're talking about might be students that would come here. And I guess I have assumed that if we accepted them, that when they came here, they would go right straight into the master's classes. But I guess I just don't know too much about how this works for master's students.
I was just gonna ask, how many students come in every year that have some English, like come right into level 6?
More than come into the bottom levels. So we have 7 levels that they can test into, and they can test out. So our program is really advantageous for people whose language is very good and their native academic standard is high, because they can test into 1010, and then they get to count LEAP as a foreign language because they're working in the second language. So we don't have to make students who are working in the second language go and take language classes for a BA. They've already fulfilled that requirement by being in the class to begin with. So when people tested, like the last testing that we did, we got 4 people tested to level 1, but probably 15 tested to level 6, and then maybe 10 less, no, how many have we got in level 7? I think Austin's got 5, and between you and I, we've got 20. So, maybe 15 tested into level 7, and then there were a few who tested out. They tested into English 1010. So it's really varied. But we do have 2 people who came this semester who don't have control of the alphabet. And in the same class, there are 3 people who have 200 words maybe. But those 200 words could be as useful as my Arabic is, which is shut up, sit down, shut the door, shut your face. You're a bunch of donkeys. Americans are crazy. And they're really useful. It makes them laugh.
Well, concerning graduate programs, many graduate programs across the country actively recruit international students. For example, at IUP, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, it's one of the biggest English departments in the country. There are PhD programs, master's programs, and there's probably 100 international students from all over the country. And the way the programs handle it is there'll usually be a TOEFL exam, test of English as a foreign language. And then also there's a program like LEAP. And so if a student scores maybe 500 or a certain level every university decides, then they might take a LEAP course before they start their master's or their PhD. And then also the quality programs are designed to help international students succeed, so they give them tutoring and other kinds of help program too. But they usually have that TOEFL exam and an ESL program if they need some advanced English language work.
The very first woman who completed all the coursework for the Master of English was from Oman. And I remember that one of her major worries was she didn't really have access to the canon of literature here. And she kept saying to me, but this is all Christian based and I don't understand what that means. You know, if it was based on Scheherazade and Alibaba, then she'd have been fine, but it was one of her biggest challenges that she didn't have access to the canon of literature, but she was successful in the classes that she did take. And it just took her so much longer because she would be translating, and that isn't always helpful, but her English wasn't out of the ESL program either, so she did have to take, I think she took a year of classes, and then into the Masters of English, but that was really challenging for her, but I was really proud of the fact that she was the first one to complete the coursework, and there was a hiccup with granting her Master of English degree to her, but I was very proud that it was an international student who was the first one through that. Yeah.
I have a practical question. So we're just 2 assignments in to Healthy Lifestyles. And, you know, that's a lot of health terms. And I'm starting to see with this assignment a translator program of some kind. So I haven't even had a chance to talk to my students about what are you using.
Google.
It doesn't make any sense.
No.
So what have they learned about that? What have they, I'm just wondering what
Well, they
they've
haven't
been
learned that language. And what would be best for you and for our students is if we could run ESP classes, but we don't have the political will or the financial ability to run those, which I think would be immensely helpful. So ESP is English for specific purposes, so we would
Right.
have a health vocabulary class, learning to contextualize and use the specific words that you would have to identify for us.
Well, I've solved or found one solution to my problem already, because 20% of my class is not able to write about what we're talking about. So I have an excellent student who's going to graduate in spring, who's doing a tutoring class starting tomorrow, every week now till the end of the semester.
SIs are always beneficial. I don't know if you can have SIs in a master's program. But SIs are something
These
that
aren't
can really
technically
save
an
them.
SI because there's no funding available. So
Mhm.
I went another route to kind of develop something to help.
Well, they're lucky that you're that concerned. It's not everybody is willing to go to those lengths, but that individual, well, it's not really individual, but that after class
Right.
help is something that they really need.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
What Debbie's saying about SIs too, I think there are SIs available, because I've had some full of carpool.
Yeah, it depends whether the funding is still there too.
Yeah.
There is a 50-50 program,
Mhm.
but then you have to find 50% of the wage.
Right.
Which
Another-
while the wage is crappy, it's
Right.
still a lot of money to
Right.
find.
Right.
Another approach is through your department. The English department has sheltered courses for international students in some of our beginning courses. So your department might choose to start a
Yeah, if
sheltered
you've got a
course.
constant stream of the same kind of population, you might be able to argue for a sheltered course. And
They
we
used to do
always
that
help
with
you.
history, 1700. It was a sheltered history course for international students. That can be all international students, or it can be a combination of American students and international.
But
So
don't-
it's designated that way
Yeah.
in the course itself.
Yeah. But don't mistake LEAP students for developmental English students. The brains of bilingual students are completely different. They're different structurally to monolingual students. So Maria's bilingual,
Okay.
and she has been bilingual since she was very small.
Right.
And your brain develops to cope with those two. But then,
Exactly.
I don't know if you've tried to learn that language. Maybe my
No,
200
I'm not that
words.
smart. You're kidding? I tell them that every week. You're so brave when you show up.
My 40 words of Arabic, probably never
Right.
going to develop much beyond that because of my age. Because your language acquisition device can close really early, and by the time you're a teenager, you've lost the ability to gain what Maria did as a child. You've been speaking English for a long time, haven't you, Harriet? From quite young? Yeah, so that brain is very different to the rest of us who've got monolingual brains, and then as we try to access that language, we use a different part of our brain to do that. And so bilingual speakers are actually much less likely to suffer from Alzheimer's, and they've got different ways to solve problems. But most of your students are going to be second language learners, which isn't the same thing either.
So, I'm a newer professor, and I'm starting to find here and there, I've got refugee students, and foreign students essentially. And well, I guess my real question is, how much leeway should I give them on their papers if their paper doesn't make a lot of sense in English?
If it looks like it's a Google Translate, then you ask them to go to the Writing Centre.
Okay.
Writing Centre prepares their tutors to be ESL friendly.
Okay.
And they don't have all the knowledge, and there's lots of different styles within the Writing Centre.
Okay.
But do you want perfect English? Because I think maybe you should go to University of Oxford.
Not
I used to
perfect,
teach
but-
English 1010, and I can tell you I had problems that were worse than ESL problems
Yeah.
that I dealt with. And so we've got a huge developmental program here, developmental English and maths. And so there are still people who are native speakers who don't produce
Yes.
well.
And I tend to grade them pretty harshly. So I'm just wondering if I should be as harsh or if I should just say
No, I think you should look for content,
content.
yeah, and comprehensibility, not
Okay.
perfection.
Okay.
I recently sat on a BIS committee. Are you familiar with the BIS program? So I sat on a BIS program, a final project recently, and the student is Japanese, but she was born here. And as I was reading through her paper, I kept coming across the same problem with her English time and time again, and I said to her, I taught her a couple of times. She's really, really bright, really switched on, and she was doing something with English and science, and it was all about immunization. And I learned a lot from reading her paper, which was 20 pages long, And I kept coming across this same problem, and I was meeting with her one day and I said, Uria, you're a second language speaker, aren't you? And she said, yes. And I said, okay. Right, that completely changes my interpretation of what you're doing here. And she said, you didn't realise? And I said, well, you know, because of your accent, no, I never thought about it. But her mum and dad own Tamari. Have you been there? Great restaurant.
Yes.
So their daughter was raised in a Japanese-speaking household. Of course, she's a second language speaker. She learned English when she was 5 and she went to school. But she has a classic second language problem. Everything's perfect except her prepositions. And she may never get her prepositions right. Even though she was raised going to English-speaking schools and she learned to read and write in English, not through Japanese, but through English, she may never get her prepositions correct. And that was what I kept seeing. And in the end of the paper, I thought, what's she doing? She said, yeah, it's my mum's fault. I said, you're right. And here she is again. Yoko needs to get her prepositions sorted out. But her mother and father speak very little English. But there is definitely comprehensibility, and her research was really good. But she's different to the students that we have who come here as adults, over 18, to learn that second language. So if you want to be kind and send them to the Writing Centre a couple of times, especially if you know you've got a Google Translate document, which won't make much sense. But we're also dealing with different cultures, so sometimes I hear people say, oh, those Saudis, all they do is copy. But there's a different purpose to education in different places. So if you think about the paintings on the inside of the pyramids, do they look like human beings? With that eye that looks at you like this, but the head's like this? How the hell do you do that? Is it just that head was moving really quickly, so you get the front view of the eye and the side view of the face, and then the shoulders are here, and the hips are here, and the feet up there? Have you ever tried to walk like that? I think there was somebody who wrote a song about it. Walk like an Egyptian. Like this, but with the eye forward. Or this way. Did Egyptians lack the ability to paint realistically? No. Because there's one king in the middle of their 5,000-year history under whom we had real looking people. The reason that that was perpetuated is that's the most beautiful part, representation of that part of the body. So this is the most beautiful, rather than the eye like this. But the profile is more beautiful than the full on. And so it's the same in Chinese culture too. You only do what the master tells you to do because he's the one who's got the knowledge. So if you have a student who copies something from a book, it's because that is the perfect answer. And that's what they're supposed to do, give you the perfect answer. The idea that you come up with all these answers yourself, or that you use critical thinking to discover how to get there, does not exist in every culture. And so we are putting a paradigm on those students that they don't understand sometimes. And when you've got a culture that is very closely family connected, the most important thing in their education is that their cousins and brothers and sisters and husbands and wives succeed. Not that they do it themselves, but that you make sure that your tribe or your clan is successful, because that is more important than being a scholar as an individual. It's more important that there's family success.
So Debbie, how do you deal with that? Because I had that happen in one of my classes a while, well, it's been a few years now, but it was Saudi students, and I had one person who took pictures of the exam with his phone and then shared it with the people who were in the night class, so they had the answers to the test. That was one instance. And then the other instance I had, I gave them a sample paper, and he copied the sample paper and turned that in as his own. And when I brought him in to talk about it, and I said, and I had highlighted what was the same. And he said, no, it's not the same. And I thought, yes, it is. So hearing you say that helps me understand a lot of what was going on with that. But how do you deal with that then as a professor? Because I felt like you did not complete this assignment, you copied it.
Well, there's a couple of things that I think of straight away. So all your tests can be in the testing centre. But
Well,
have them at the
that's
same
a
time.
given.
Have them
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
So the class, we're going to have a day off and you're going to go and take the test, and it will be during class time. If you're late, you don't get to take it. Because there are people from all cultures who can memorize that test and then share it from memorization. I had a student once who was told, even though the teacher had been told not to do this, was told the day before the test, the essay writing, what the topic would be. This kid could not speak, read or write anything in English comprehensively. It was a mess. Everything was a mess. And he produced a perfectly punctuated and spelled essay. And I said to the teacher, you told him the topic, didn't you? Yeah? I said, well, he went home and memorized. No, you can't do that. Welcome to a culture that learns by rote. He was able to memorize something. And so you can always test that with, can you summarize this for me? Just tell me what it is that you wrote, so that I understand what your argument is. So you can ask for summarizing. But also, at the beginning of the semester, talk about what is expected in the classroom. And so there are two stories that I use. One is about, what was your name? Barrett. Okay, so Barrett's on the soccer team, okay, but he's just broke his leg. So we're going to send Helen to practice for him. And it's going to take him 6 weeks before he can get back on the team, but as long as Helen turns up, he's going to be fine. All the new things that the coach teaches, she's going to understand, and she's going to develop that. So when he goes back after 6 weeks, he's going to be much improved, isn't he? And the students look at me like, he's English. Which you need? Which one's crazy English? All of them. Okay. And they say, no, teacher. Well, how would you learn anything? How would he learn anything if she does his homework? Same thing. And I've had occasion to use the example of Suleiman from the Quran, who is Solomon from the Bible, about the woman, the two women, and the baby that's chopped the baby in half. And so when I've had 3 students turn in the same homework, I say, okay, so let me tell you the story of Suleiman. You know that, teacher? Yep. Then I say, okay, so do I chop you in half? Or do I give you 1/3 of the grade, 1/3 of the grade, 1/3 of the grade? Or as you did the homework, how about I give you the grade and you two get a big fat 0? And so being able to relate it to something that is a story that they would understand, especially if it's something that is recognized as a cultural foundation, like the Quran can be. And lots of the biblical stories are similar to stories in the Quran. And just pointing out that there has to be this critical thinking, otherwise that I would encourage you to turn papers in through Turnitin. There's lots of papers where students have said, I did this, and I'm like, yeah, do you know what? I know who wrote this, because look at this report. And I know that he didn't write it. For a start, I know that he didn't write it, so that's been copied from somewhere else. So you do have tools like that, but I think that telling students at the first day of the semester is really important then for understand that you're not after them, but this is what your expectation is. But there is a lot of money riding on these classes as well. I don't know how many of you know how much international students pay. $7,000 a semester. And so they want their bang for their buck, but they want to be successful as well. And SACM, the scholarship granting body for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, doesn't tolerate fails. So if they do fail a class, they have to pay it for themselves. They have to pay that themselves, and that's a lot of money. And people sometimes have the mistaken belief that all the Saudis are wealthy. I had a disagreement with one of my own teachers recently. She said, well, you know, they've got so much money. And I said, no, they haven't. And all these kids in this class, they're all paying for themselves because they haven't got the scholarship yet. And so she said, oh, well, I thought they all had oil wells, camels. How did I get somebody so ignorant teaching in this program? Oh, that's right, I didn't choose you. For good reason. And so there is this idea that all these Saudis are wealthy, and many of them are not. Many of them come from very humble families, and this is their opportunity to change their community and to raise the status of their family as well. It's really important. It's not just financial considerations that our Saudi students have. There's a lot personal reputation, family reputation, And we don't have a typical Saudi. I don't think there are any typical Saudis. Just like you wouldn't want the Queen. I wouldn't want the Queen to represent me. First of all, she's got that strange accent, which is funnier than mine. But I'm sure that Maria wouldn't want, see, it's because Maria's a native Spanish speaker, people think that she comes from Spanish-speaking America, which is a huge place, and it's full of very diverse people. And I'm sure that she doesn't want, what's his name? Mano de Dios. Mano de Dios? See, yeah. Argentinian. Big cheek, football player, soccer player. You know there's no such thing as soccer, don't you? That's when you play in socks. Maradona. Diego Maradona. Would anybody in America want to, don't look at me like that. You know who he is, don't you? You know who he is. Maradona is the guy in the Argentinian team, when they beat Scotland, I think, touched the ball with his hand. And in soccer, you cannot touch the ball with your hand unless you're throwing in. And so he touched the ball with his hand. He said, no, it wasn't me, it was the hand of God. And they beat the Scots, and they've never forgiven them for beating. But now Maradona's a drug addict, so it's worked out nicely, I think. Circle of vice is complete. So we feel like, yes, you Argentinians, by the way. So just as Maria wouldn't want to be represented by an Argentinian, and I don't want to be represented by a whining Scot, just because I've lived there doesn't make me one. And they're very happy for me not to want to be Scottish, because I'm Anglo-Irish. So I would encourage you to be aware of these people as individuals as well. You know, if you have a Chinese student who cheats, it doesn't mean that they're all going to do that. And please make sure you don't call a Korean a Chinese, and don't call a Chinese a Japanese either. It's a really long, deep-seated hatred between some of those nations.
Or just because an American spouse writes all the papers for his or her spouse, it doesn't mean all American spouses
No,
do that.
it
Although
doesn't.
it happens quite a bit.
And just because the American husband that I had was a complete waste of space doesn't mean that you all are, does it? He was sure that he was right about everything. His mission in life was to convince me how stupid I was. And I married him. Is there any questions that you want to ask Hamad? Hamad and Naif are from the west part of Saudi Arabia. And Nigeria's Harriet's from Nigeria. I was going to say Nigeria's from Harriet. And then Hamud, who's hoping that you won't ask him any questions. He's very shy. Does anybody have any questions specifically for them?
Are there things that we can do as professors in the classroom that help you feel more included, that help you feel more accepted and feel more comfortable in the classroom?
Many classes, yes, we get comfortable in class, but in other classes, like my major is professional sales, so I have 10:30 I have class, so all of them American. I cannot talk with them like clearly with my accent.
Right.
I cannot talk with the professor. I mean, so it's hard to talk with them.
Why don't you like to answer questions, Harriet?
Because of our accent and like I'm black, so like I don't want to be like I'll answer questions in class and everybody just stare at me like what she's saying and some this kind of stuff. So I don't really, even though I know the answer to the question in class, but I don't talk in class at all.
And then she'll lose her participation points.
So what can we as professors do differently? If you were the teacher and you had a group of international students and English students, what would you do?
I would direct questions to them so they will to talk in class. So like it would just be like I'm talking to the Americans, so it's like I'm talking to everybody.
I think group work helps.
What?
Group work helps. Group work can really help students to feel more comfortable, and they can share their ideas, and then there's somebody who can summarize, and that way they're able to speak. I know that I have often found it a pain, a right royal pain in the Aris, which you spell with 2 S's. And we don't spell with 2 S's. Whatever you say, whether it's ours or Aris, it's 1 S. So, and that's a proper way to say it, obviously. So I found it a pain when, so I'm finishing my PhD, I'm just doing my dissertation, but I can't tell you the number of times in a group setting, students would say, Debbie, you talk. And I'd say, could I not, please? No, go on. Why? Well, because you always sound convincing. My accent made people believe that I knew what I was talking about. And I know that there were times when I talked a whole bunch of shite, but people were like, it's just so easy to pull the wool over your eyes. You know, I know that I get off speeding tickets because of how I sound, but there's nothing more wearing than going to somewhere like Subway. I went with my kids and my son-in-law, and I was the last one to order my sandwich, and Adam, who's kind of distrusting of his brother-in-law, not sure why, has heard me complain all the time about people saying, oh, you people. And I said, you know, it just gets tedious. And so him and Laura had ordered theirs, and then Jenny orders hers, and she adopts an American accent so that people don't ask her where she's from. And she's really, really shy. So she'll say, no tomato. Tomato. So she says everything with an American accent, and that's all she'll say. Cucumber, tomato. Okay, so she gets through, and then I speak, and it's very hard for me to adopt another accent. And so, no tomato, please. Oh, where are you from? Here we go. And I want to say Texas. Because it shuts But I can't say it when there's some more to be said. You know, so no tomato, please. Oh, where are you from? Texas. And it's supposed to give people enough time to think about that, and I can escape, but I can't when I'm in Subway. So I say, I'm from England, and she says, oh, you people, and she's kind of loud, and I see out of the corner of my eye, my son-in-law go, and he moves my daughter away, and then when we went out to the car, we all got in, and I'm the last one to get in, because I've gone the furthest around the car, so I get in, and I shut the door, and I said, did you hear? And he said, I did. And I knew that she was in trouble as soon as she said that. And he said, I've never heard it before, and you're right, it's rude. It's very rude to do that. But I've been here for 16 years, and I kind of got used to hearing that. It doesn't make it any easier, it's still tiresome to hear that. But sometimes people are silenced by their ability to speak. And I hate it when people say, well, Debbie, why don't you talk about this? Because I have colleagues who say, we don't understand you when you speak. I just think, after 16 years, that's just rude. But never mind. You'll retire. And nobody will understand you at all. I did actually say to this one person, I just got a smartphone. I got this phone, and I can talk to it, and it understands me. So I'm only going to communicate with you through texts now. And he said, I haven't got a phone. There's no way for me to actually be successful at this. I don't want to win, I just want to succeed. So is there anything else that you think our smiling people can help you with? They're all very anxious that you'll make them speak.
You know, one of my, well, actually several of my students, I've got twins, I've got brothers, I've got cousins, not necessarily, there's several families, but they've shared a lot of pictures, which has been great, because they're a little shy to speak sometimes also. And when we talked about diversity and health and discrepancies and all kinds of things, and what does your family situation look like, they've shared a lot of feast pictures and pictures of their families, and we're very proud to do that and talk. And that, I think that made it easier to talk about the experience rather than just sitting and talking and, you know, I'm going to be up in front of a class. So that was something that, you know, I hadn't thought of before, but they were willing to do that.
Did you see any pictures of girls?
Yes, we both. Well, you know, we cover a lot of topics in healthy lifestyles. So.
But then it's just that usually you don't see pictures of mums, sisters and brothers.
Oh, only because I asked, yes.
All right.
Okay. Okay, let's give Debbie a hand. Thank you. And our students, yeah.
They were prepared to talk even if they didn't talk a lot. And I know that Hamad has not lost his voice. He's just very shy. The Hamad and Hamid contingent are shy.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming, and now with our gifts series, we have
Gifts?
gifts.